Hello, hello. Hi, my name is Tada or Taddy. Um, I'm a mental health professional and also a social justice advocate, supporter of universal basic income and also human-centered economics. And naturally, that would, mean I'm a supporter and follower of Andrew Yang's campaign, and in fact, got introduced to those ideas through his campaign. So, wanted to give a little back by sharing some content. And today, I especially wanted to talk to you today about a lot of what's happening around the campaign and right now, especially as the race intensifies as we move into the Iowa caucus, is this kind of question from especially the progressive base and progressive media outlets, is that whether Andrew Yang is truly a progressive or not. And something I want to just say about that is that Andrew Yang is not a progressive. And yeah, let's just put that out there. And what I mean by that is that when you actually look at Andrew, he's actually already said, literally, that I'm not very ideological. Like, he just wants to make shit work. And, that's a Ronnie Chang, I think, a reference. But Asians just want to make shit work. But, so he's not particularly ideological. And so a lot of his platform appeals to a wide swath of people, and they can see their core desires in it. So UBI is like a great example. It for conservatives and libertarians, it reduces government spending and bloat. But for progressive people and leftists, it provides a really, really amazing social safety net, social safety floor, because a net you can fall through, and that's one of the problems, right? Shout out to Scott Sandins. But so the thing is, everybody can see a little bit of themselves in Andrew Yang in a way, ideologically. If you're in any ideological camp, there's something maybe in it for you. And it's something that's very core, actually, like small government and also like, social welfare. Andrew satisfies both, or has a platform that addresses both issues really well, I think. And the thing about that, though, at the same time, is if you come from a mindset of hypervigilance or, what you call scarcity. So you're in this constant feeling of threat. Something's always like, always a threat in your environment. You're looking for, something's got to be wrong with this. Something's got to be wrong with this. Something's got to be wrong with that. And if that's driving a lot of your way of thinking, and this is especially true probably in relationships to politicians, because so many of them have kind of fucked us over. So it's natural for us to be afraid. Is that puts Andrew in a very peculiar and interesting situation, because for the same reason that he appeals to a broad audience who are maybe centrist or left or right, and they're like, we can see that he addresses some of the core desires I have. The other hand is that if you come from a scarcity or hypervigilant mindset, he can really trigger you, because what happens when people try to vet people in these kind of groups is that our social behavior is that we look, for the certain check boxes of behavior that tells us a person is a part of our group. So if you're progressive, they might be like Medicare for all, single payer, like, and other like different things that they don't come to mind right now. But you have these like check boxes, and you might also have words that they use, right? Like they need to say this word instead of this word, and this word instead of this word, right? And all those become these kind of like purity tests, essentially. That's what it is that if you don't pass those, you're a scary person. We can't let you in, right? And frankly, you actually see that there's a lot of violence in leftist culture amongst each other, because people try to apply these purity tests, and when they fail, inevitably, because we're human, they fling mud on each other and get really violent. Maybe it's not like physical violence, but violence in terms of calling people out, doxing people, just hammering them on Twitter and stuff like that, right? So that kind of purity test is very much part of progressive culture. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is that progressives are starting to realize, hey, maybe Andrew is not our guy. And they're kind of correct, because Andrew is not just exclusively about all the progressive kind of check boxes. He is not that. And that's actually the magic of Andrew, I think, from what I see, is that he's willing to not be anything and everything. And that is like very flexible. It's one of the things I love, that you see that he's able to improve him on idea rather than flip-flopping. He refines and like, take in new information from one place and say, does that actually work better, and keeps modifying. He is willing to look at evidence and data, not just morals, and be like, okay, so from this, how does it make sense to, what is the best approach to the subject? And so Andrew doesn't really actually fit very well with a lot of progressive culture, the progressive like kind of groupthink, because Andrew is like not a moral leader. He has morals and he can show moral leadership, but what I mean is that he's not somebody like AOC or Bernie Sanders that makes a statement and it's like has this resonance that is about like this kind of maybe outrage or anger, which is appropriate sometimes, but rather, so he's not that kind of moral leader. Andrew Yang is a thought leader. And that distinction, I also think, is very hard for people who are traditional progressives actually to understand. Because a traditional progressive, to me, has a very high moral character, and that's awesome. That's one of the things that's brought to the table. It's like, this is wrong, and we're like, yes, that's wrong. But for me, Andrew represents something a little bit different. He operates a little bit more from that place of thought leadership. So that means that introducing new ideas like UBI and human-centered capitalism to the field, right? And to do that, he is actually willing to be almost misunderstood by his own, by his own people base. The own base sometimes doesn't understand him, and then takes time going like, oh, okay, that's starting to make sense now. That's a lot about how he operates, right? And I think that's something that's really missing from the 2020 field, is that kind of thought leadership. And that's why I feel so invested into him. I know that he's not a perfect candidate. I know he's not a perfect human, like nobody is. But the thing I see that this is a person who shows thought leadership, has a strong moral stance, and also able to shift their beliefs around things in the ways they understand things over time. Which is, I think, really amazing, because you see him like things like foreign policy, like read and actually, he's reading about these things as he's going through his campaign, and actually, like, you see him show up at a debate, and he has better answers. So, I mean, that's my perspective as being in the Yang Gang too. If you're Yang curious or like kind of from outside, you're maybe not. That's not how you think. But if that is who you are, actually, the thing I really recommend, and this is not me trying to necessarily say like you have to join the Yang Gang or anything like that, is that, or even if you're Yang Gang, this may be helpful, is when we get into a doubtful place, remind ourselves that, like, okay, we don't want to be making these decisions about people from a place of hypervigilance or scarcity, right? It's okay that maybe we're triggered. It's okay that we feel, like about something and uncomfortable, but we have to be able to separate that from the actual human being a bit, right? And the reason why that's hard is because so many times in our life, when we're afraid of something, people prove that they're the thing that we're afraid of. So we keep expecting it. But really in life, it's not that clear cut. People can maybe send signals that they're like, oh, you need to be scared of this. But is he actually saying that? And this is really important for us to understand and vetting Andrew as a candidate. And for us to come back to like, okay, so what are the things that maybe ground us into a better understanding who this person is? And I think the best place, honestly, to look is like, what are his relationships with, well, sorry about the ringing, my cat is eating food, so you might hear a few dings. But one of the things that you probably want to really look at is what is his relationship to the people that he's closest to. So maybe that's the people on the campaign trail, maybe that's his family. And get a sense of how do they treat him and how does he treat them? And from that place, make a sense of like, oh, what is this person's general orientation towards? And once you've established a sense of like what that is, I invite you to then again look at what he's saying, what he's doing, and go, okay, is this thing that's happening, am I being triggered into this feeling of hypervigilance and going like, or you're using these purity tests to like kind of like, figure him out, or do you have a valid critique, right? And so that kind of, I think, ability to vet people, and I think is really important to having a healthy democracy, and understanding that, yeah, is really, really important. Because actually one of the things that's really dangerous actually about these purity tests that we use, especially on the left, is that it's so easy for us to get manipulated. Because essentially, because we have these check boxes that make us feel, oh, okay, we put all our defenses down when we hear, somebody says like, I'm fighting for the working people, and they're like, oh, that's what I needed to hear, like, sigh, we kind of like let our guard down, or kind of more like just like buy into the person in like this very like over the top way. The thing that we need to understand is those check boxes, because they're really actually mostly about surface behavior, they are really, really easy to manipulate, and they're not necessarily accurate reflection of the person's character, which is really how they behave in their relationships. So that is something that's really important. And, to be honest, I feel like somebody, for example, that's a representation of this, and I'm not saying that she's like a sociopathic manipulator or anything. She might be kind of unconscious of how she's doing it, but it doesn't look good, is like somebody like Elizabeth Warren, right? Because she like kind of like knows these check boxes, she'll say things that are like appealing for people who are looking for these purity tests to grab into and take a hold on into. But when you look at her behavior around let's say her talking about her supposed indigenous ancestry and stuff like that, or how she talks about her like affiliation with working class people, but she's actually like really wealthy now, and she was a Harvard law professor and has all these privileges of being like a beautiful white person, especially imagine like, like how that would benefit her. So I think we had, and then she's talking about rich people and how they're damning, but she's sitting on like a lot. She's definitely like in the 1%. So I think, I think we have to look at that. And when you actually look at Andrew, you might be like, oh, this person's not like radical enough or progressive enough. But if you actually look at his behavior, like for example, now being yang, I'm just gonna pour it on. Like, what you'll actually see is that like his book, he's the only presidential candidate, I believe, from what I've seen, that has a book that's not about himself. It's called The War on Normal People, and I read it, and one of the first things he says is that I am not a normal person. I've been extremely fortunate, right? And I think that is kind of the core behavioral patterns that I think we need to pay attention to. And another example, there's a lot of questions around him. I think it came up around, there's an article around him talking about autism, and how perhaps that the words that he uses, like special needs, is not the right terminology. I totally understand why that would be. Also, him talking about his autistic children, not about maybe about autistic adults, which is untrue, because he actually clearly says autistic children become autistic adults and we need to think about their support. He explicitly says that. But these are like more like, again, purity tests around like, oh, does this person use the right language, or does this person say the right things? But actually, when you actually listen to his core thing around disability justice, is that human value is not economic value. Like, bang. That is like the foundation thing that needs to be addressed in terms of disability justice. And I say this as a person who considers themselves disabled or a spoonie. So that kind of, understanding to get to that, or be available to that, because again, I'm not trying to convert you necessarily here, or maybe I am, who knows, but you will, you encounter hypervigilance, and Andrew Yang is not a person who is like this like progressive that learn all the right progressive words and tricks, and language, and walking in with those tools, right? I believe he is somebody who is, far as I understand, is somebody who has a sense internally that there's a moral compass. He's really open and available to ideas, and that makes him such an asset to people who are progressives, who are maybe looking at solutions for some of their problems. And I think he really offers some really interesting ones. And in that sense, I don't think he's a progressive in that traditional sense. What I would say, though, is Andrew is a progressive definitely in the sense that he's looking forward to the future. And I think that's the most important part, because one of the ironies around the word progressive is that progressive can also be a category, has a lot of like conservative values around work and human value. You keep hearing like Bernie talk about, I'm for the working people, and it's like, yeah, cool. What about the people who can't work, like disabled people? Like not all of us can work. Do we have value? You know what I mean? Like, are you for us? Like, so in that, this is like the thing that you come back to, is so there is such actually a thing as like a traditional progressive, and somebody who's progressive in the sense of they're looking and orienting towards the future. So Andrew Yang does not fit any of the traditional political categories, and that's, in my belief, that's why he's really interesting and amazing to me and fascinating to watch, but also probably very triggering to people. And I just wanted to give a little, bit of, a little bit of a my spiel about what we do when we feel uncomfortable with Andrew, or with anybody, and then how we work from there. And that doesn't mean that like you're going to trust Andrew and everything, you're going to believe everything that comes out of his mouth, but it's just like giving you, instead of being like hyper vigilant, being like, you're like healthily critical, as opposed to like being like overly agitated and overly attacking. You're just kind of like, oh, there's my cat. But you're just kind of like, okay, so this is my right sized feeling of, I need to critique this, but I also see that this is good. This is really good part of it, So maybe in terms of like how he addresses like autism, it might be like, oh, okay, this is really good that he says human value is not economic. That's really great. But, I wish he would, instead of saying special needs, use another word if that feels better to me, So that's what I, in psychotherapy language, call that right sizeness. You're not going in black and white. You're able to calibrate your emotions. So I think that's very, very important. Anyways, so thanks for watching this episode, and tell me what you think, or tell me what you think.